My my cam link, did my cam link just die? Hang on. Okay. I was about to get really concerned there because I had tested it before I went live, and the cam link was working. Apparently, it just needed a restart or something. Anyways, the giveaway form is open because I actually took the time to like pre-schedule it on the form itself. So the giveaway is open, and this is for what's the word I was looking for? This is for January this month, and we will go ahead and draw a winner at the end of the month to see who gets the $150 gift card. I am just getting feeding my caffeine addiction, so I hopefully don't yawn during the stream. So, anyways, Tim bought a razor. Yeah, Tim shaved at the beginning. Well, last year. I haven't shaved since last year. I completely shaved the beard off. This is growth since the first of the year. So, but you guys need to ask your questions in chat. My mic's running a little hot today. Let's go ahead and turn that down just a touch. And I finally got a new. Shock mount that is not held together with TPU. So there we go. Less jankiness here on the setup. So, anyways, let's see. Who do we have in the chat? Why is YouTube is not behaving right now? Because the live chat window, I'm not seeing all of the damn chats. Let's see here. What's the oldest chat in here? On the right. Okay, if there's any, I don't think there's any questions before Matt Rawson, where he said, hi, everyone. All right. So, let's see. We got someone here. First question is a customer, not one of our customers, but not surprised, a Big Tree Tech customer is asking for help because we know Big Tree Tech doesn't support their own stuff. But I might be able to help you out here. He says he's got the E3 Mini, and it homes off the bed, and it moves at a snail's pace. So homing off the bed, it could be determined, I'm assuming you're talking about your XY, or you're talking about your Z. If your XY homes your nozzle off the bed, you would need to enter into your firmware the homing offsets. And what those do is they tell the printer how much further it needs to move the nozzle onto the bed after it touches off from the end stop to get to the zero position. And if terms of how fast it homes, that's also a setting in the firmware. We're going off of Marlin firmware here. If you're using something else, you're going to be on your own because I don't mess with anything other than Marlin at the current point in time. I believe they have Clipper working on those boards, but most people seem to use Marlin on them. But in terms of how fast it homes, that would be a homing setting. Marlin does home pretty slow. I think it's 30 or 40 millimeters a second for the default homing rate. I think I usually run my printers at about 50 to 60. If you're talking about general moves, and that's usually G-code telling it how fast or slow to move. And this is all assuming all your other firmware parameters are set up correctly, like your steps per millimeter. And I'm assuming your motor directions are correct, because if they weren't, you'd be having a lot more issues than just homing and moving. So, but, you know, example in terms of setting your steps per millimeter, let's say you have a printer and your X and Y need 80 steps per millimeter, and they're only set at 40, then it's going to under move in terms of how much it actually moves and how fast it appears to move. So those are settings you want to check when you're setting up your firmware for your machine, is that you have the correct variables entered in, so the firmware knows exactly what is connected to it, so when it tells it to do things, it's actually doing things correctly. Let me see if there's any other messages. I don't know if he stuck around. I don't know if there's any other messages from him, but I can always circle back. Let's see. You know, I ironically used that phrase, and now it's just in my vocabulary. Isn't that how it goes? Let's see here. What other questions do we have? So if you guys posted a question before I don't know, before the stream went live, I'm not going to be able to see it, so you should probably repost them. Or actually just even before we started queuing up, because the comment from Matt Rawson that says, "Hey everyone," that's the oldest comment I can see. So let's see if there's any other questions in here. Matt Rawson. So he's got EasyBoard V2, and after connecting and flashing the firmware, all I got was a blue screen. I've disconnected and reconnected everything all back together, same deal. So the first question is going to be, is it actually taking the firmware? So on our board, and this happens on other boards too, if the board is actually taking the firmware in, meaning it's programming it to the processor, the file will get renamed on the SD card from firmware.bin to firmware.cur. So that's the first thing I would check. See if it's actually taking the firmware. If it's not, if you're getting just the blue screen, which is just a backlight on your LCD lighting up, I would double check that that everything's connected correctly and you're connected to the right headers. I would assume you're probably using a Creality printer if you're using the EasyBoard. And on their LCDs, they can have either one connector, two connectors, or three. Most of the newer printers will come with the three connectors if you have the 12864. And you need to make sure you're connecting the LCD cable to the EXP3 header on the LCD itself if you're using the single cable connection. If you have an older board or older LCD board that only has the two cable connection, you should be going the two cables into the adapter board. That's a separate add-on for the EasyBoard. And then that needs to go into the LCD header onto the printer board, and just make sure that you're matching the EXP1 to EXP1 on the LCD and vice versa. So I don't have any more information other than what you posted here. So I'm just kind of, scattershotting, so to speak, of all the possibilities that could lead to the LCD not displaying anything. So, but I would check to see if the firmware is actually taking. If the firmware is actually taking, that would usually indicate that there could be an issue with the connection between the LCD and the board itself. I don't know if you're running like a custom build or if it's going into a Creality printer. I'm seeing if there's any other details added into here. It did change to .cur, so it is pulling the firmware in, so that's good. What I recommend too is take a bunch of pictures, like overkill pictures. Take a picture of your whole printer and all the connections going from the LCD to the board, and then go to our website, hit the contact us link, and send in those pictures to our support team so they can review and see what's going on. My other question would be, has that LCD worked previously on another board? And again, I don't know what printer you're running it on. He says enter 3. So if that LCD worked on the other board, that's another thing too, because we've had people where they changed the board out and their LCD was having issues before the upgrade, and then the LCD still doesn't work because the LCD was faulty. So, but anyways, yeah, check connections. It sounds like the firmware's pulling in. So it could be a connection issue. It could be just a faulty LCD screen. It'd be really easy to test that. I'm assuming you have a stock board that probably works well enough to fire up the screen. What I always do is if I'm putting in a new product and I'm like, this is not working, I'll go back to the old board and be like, okay, well, the LCD works on this. There could be something else going on here. So let's see. What's the next question? I'm looking for questions. I need to build a bot for questions. I talked about this on the last stream, but I only have so much time in the day. Aiden says he's got a CR10 Mini with the EasyBoard V2. The Y-axis is not homemade, just moves forward a few inches. So that indicates, and you can verify this with the M119 command. So if, and this is on any board, not just the EasyBoard, running Marlin anyways, if an end stop switch is always reading that it's triggered, what'll happen is it'll just move the axis away from the end stop, and that's it. So if it thinks the end stop's always triggered, then it's not going to move the bed back because the end stop's telling it that it's always triggered. So if you, I might have a board to plug in via USB. that has M119 enabled. I have an easy. I don't know if this has test firmware. I'm not gonna get tangent. I'm not gonna go on a tangent. But basically, check to see if your end stop is triggered. If it's showing triggered all the time, then that could indicate either your switch is bad, maybe you connected a wire to the wrong spot. But M119, so I'll post that in the chat. So M119, and you can send that if you're connected to the board over a program like Pronterface, which is just a console that gives you the output from the board. So when your printer's doing stuff, it actually has a serial console that gives status updates and allows you to send commands to the board. So you can plug into your computer and see what's going on. And the M119 status will tell you, or the M119, blah, can't talk today apparently. The M119 command will give you a report of all your end stops. So you'll see X, Y, Z, and then if you have a filament sensor, it'll also report the filament sensor status. So if the end stop, like if the bed isn't up against the end stop and you send M119 command and the Y-axis end stop is showing triggered, that indicates there's a problem there. It could be wiring, it could be a switch. On the CR10 Mini, the X and the Y are the same exact end stop switch. So you could, what I would do is switch the two and see if now the X is always showing triggered versus the Y, or if it still shows triggered on the Y. If it's still showing triggered on the Y, that could indicate an issue with the wire going between the end stop and the board, or just something as simple as maybe you plugged it into the wrong header. So it just thinks it's always triggered, you know, because there's a bunch of things that use those 2-pin end stop connection or 2-pin JST connections. There's the end stops, there's the thermistors. Thermistors, I believe, will, if you plug them into an end stop port, they will probably show triggered because it's going to pull that pin down to ground. So when you have, on the Creality printers anyways, you have two wires going to your end stop. One goes to a ground pin and the other goes to a signal. And depending on if the switch is pressed or not, that pin will either be high or low. And so the processor on the board knows if an end stop is hit, depending on if that signal is high or low. And I believe Creality uses what are called normally closed end stop switches. So if the switch is not pressed, that pin will be pulled low and it will recognize that it's open. And as soon as the axis, whether it's your bed carriage or your X-axis or even your Z, hits that switch, it opens the circuit, the pin goes high, and then it'll report that it's triggered. So that's where I would start there. But yeah, if you were to hold down your X end stop switch and tell it to home, the X would do the same thing, where instead of it going like this where it touches, so like when you home in Marlin, in ours anyways, you can, these are all settings you can change, but typically I have a touch off. So it goes up, and let's say this is the end stop switch. So, the axis will come over, it'll touch the end stop switch, it'll back off a little bit and then go like that. It'll do a double tap. Now, if the end stop switch is messed up, and even if the carriage is right here, it's just going to move it away and away. Every time you home, it'll keep moving it away further from the end stop because it's not going to try to touch the end stop if it's already triggered. So it's kind of a built-in like safety feature. So that's what I would start there. And we do actually support our products, so if you need help, feel free to reach out to our support team if you need further troubleshooting. But that sounds like a very simple, it could be a wiring issue, it could be just a bad end stop. But the M119 command should be able to tell you if that is the case with your machine or not. So, all right. Let's see. Where? Chat jumped again. I'm looking. There wouldn't be a stream without yawns. Don't tell my body. Let's see. Peter Anderson is the next question. He said, how do you measure current going to the steppers? Well, you could put a current clamp on there. I have actually never measured current going to the steppers. Because most of my boards are smart TMC drivers, meaning like they're controlled via the drivers, like with the Easy board or even like the MKS boards that have the TMCs. I just tell it what to set and the driver figures it all out. But you could just measure it like any other current, tell it to do a very fast move. And this isn't going to give you a precise measurement because the amount of current that's going to be delivered to the motor is going to vary depending on the velocity of the move it's being told. But if you're telling the printer to do a really quick move, that's going to give it a pretty good surge of current because you're going to go from one end to the other. So like, let's say you got a 300 millimeter wide X, you tell it to go from 0 to 300. At a certain point, it's going to crank the motor current up during that gap of the start and stop position. So you should be able to get a decent idea of it. There's also different ways where you could put, you know, like a current measuring device in between it. But the only problem is then you're dealing with, there is a PWM signal going on there, and some of the cheaper stuff might not be happy with that. So I would probably use a current clamp. That's something, now you got me thinking, because I kind of want to put a current clamp on there while a printer's going and see. Because I've never measured the current going to a motor. Usually what I do to check to see if I'm overdriving a motor or not is based on the temperature of the motor. If it's running burning hot, meaning I can't keep my fingers on there, which is usually around the 60 to 70 C range, that usually means you're pushing too much current to the motor. Because if you have too little current, it's going to run cool. So more current, more heat. Let's see. Nemo Griff, is there a way to set the load unload length from the LCD in the unified firmware? I believe there is, but it depends on what board you have, because I know in Marlin, I haven't looked at that, but I feel like I remember seeing that setting. Basically, the TLDR is if that setting's available in Marlin and your board has enough memory, like it's a 512K board or higher, like a Atmel 2560, or like an Easy board, or, you know, the S-Gen L, that kind of stuff that has more memory available to add more features. If that's in Marlin, it should be on there. I haven't messed with that at all, because I set all those load unload lengths in the actual firmware itself, and I can actually pull that up. That's something I could screen share quite easily. Let me pull up my GitHub here, because you can actually set the load and unload length in the firmware fairly easy. I'm just pulling up my source code here, and this is for Marlin, which is what Unified 2 is built on. So if we switch over here, and we search, I think it's load length. Yeah, right here. So load length. So in the configuration ADV file, you've got here, and if you're using regular Marlin, you'll just see one unload length here. I have multiple options defined for different load lengths depending on what printer it is, because, you know, you have some that have a filament sensor that's mounted. So if you back the filament out too much, it'll back up in the sensor. So we have a very short load length set. The Ender 5 Plus would be a good example. The Ender 6 would be a good example, where the sensor is mounted right by the extruder, and if you push back, it'll catch the edge of the switch, and it could cause a filament to snap. It could cause the switch to get damaged, so we set the load length low. And also here for, you know, direct drive machine, you have a direct drive printer, it's a much lower load length for the or unload length for the what's the word I'm looking for the filament path, because it's a direct drive. But the default for all Bowden systems and ours for the unload length is 100. Now, the load length here, for the general setting here, you've got a fast load length and a slow load length. And this is used by the change filament option too. And I believe advanced pause also uses that. And you also have like the purge length. So you got a bunch of different settings. So you got your filament change, okay? And you've got your purge setting here. So the advanced pause is what M600 uses. So if you have a filament sensor, the advanced pause purge length, this is the value that gets used, and this tells the printer how much length to purge out of the nozzle. So when you load the filament back in and it starts purging, this is the value that determines how much filament's pushed out on the initial load, and then when you hit purge more or continue. So if you hit continue, it's going to go back to printing. If you hit purge more, it's going to extrude this much more out of the nozzle. So if you want a longer load length, you can literally just change this, and this is in millimeters, to whatever length you want. Now these settings here are the actual filament change option, and as far as I know, the unload length, even though it's a filament change unload length, this is also used by the M600. So if you issue an M600, these values are used for the unload. Whereas for the purge itself, when you resume the print, that's where it gets this value for. So you can see the filament change load length, we just have set to 0 here. And there's just a lot of options. So this is in the configuration H section, and you can see the header here, the advanced pause for filament change. You can see here adds a G code for M600. This is required for the filament runout script, and then the parking, so you have to have nozzle park enabled, which is enabled in ours. But yeah, so these are where all those settings are handled here. So, and you can see here the pause park, the initial retract length. So this is a very useful setting because when your filament runs out, you want it to pull back a tiny bit so it doesn't blob all over the print. So as soon as the M600 is issued, and it actually starts initiating the pause feature, you want it to back out just a little bit so you don't get oozing as it moves to the park position. So then once it parks, it'll unload the filament and wait for you to put more filament in. So, but yeah, there's all sorts of different settings here. So you can see here's the, oh, here we go, unload length, purge, 8. There you go. And then the retract. So there's a lot of different settings in here. I wish they did a better job of explaining it, but this is where all those settings are. So if you want to mess around with them and change them, there's a bunch of different settings. It's not just load and unload. And you can see here, filament, unload, and load G codes. Oh, and here, adds plus load, unload in the LCD. So this is not enabled in our firmware. I did not even realize that. I have seen it in Marlin builds. This is probably disabled by default in Marlin because I don't remember commenting this out. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at the settings we use. So, oh no. Oh, that's okay. There's no actual passwords in there. There's an old Blue Iris JSON file. But I use secrets because that's what you should use in Home Assistant. Let's not get sidetracked. Anyways. I'm looking for the next question. So Superconductor, he says, using your firmware with my stock Creality board, is it easier to go back to vanilla Marlin if I get a different... Wait, stock Creality MCU. I'm assuming you're talking about the board. MCU is the processor. If you're swapping a processor on a Creality board, that's quite a waste of time. I would just get a different board or just get another Creality board. But you can go back and forth between our builds and Marlin builds and even stock builds. You know, in terms of if you change the whole board out, you would have to see if it's a board that we support. So we have some firmware for some of the older Big Tree Tech SKR mini boards. I wanted to get something out and get one of their new V3s in my hand so I could at least test it. But I only have so much time in the day and I'm one person. So I'm literally the only person that does firmware work here. So if anybody wants to, you know, collaborate and, you know, donate their time to working on firmware and adding more stuff to Unified, we do have the source code posted on GitHub and you can issue pull requests. And I do review them. But yeah, I'm the only one that does firmware here. So there's a lot of stuff I'd like to do, but I only have so much time in the day and I'm not going to be burning myself out again. So let's see. Michael Bowman says he's got the Ender 3 V2 and he's suffering layer shifts. Motherboard should I replace it with the 427 or better? So the Ender 3 V2 is it's very common to have layer shifts on that because the board tends to overheat because Creality cheaped out on the layers on the copper and those trinamic drivers run hot. I have not heard any issues with the 427 board having layer shifts on there, but the trick is going to be to keep that board cool, whether that's, you know, printing a new cover for the housing to allow more air in, putting a bigger fan on, or just elevating the printer a little bit so you can get more fresh air into there. The 427 is a decent board if you're looking for a good budget board. Our Easy Board V2 supports the Ender 3 V2 as well, but the main issue is it's not uncommon for the Ender 3 V2 to have layer shifts because Creality just cheaped out on the board and it overheats. Now, my theory with the 427, and I've done thermal testing, and the 427 does run cooler despite it still having trinamics and less copper on the PCB. The more copper you have, the better heat sinking ability it has to cool the drivers. The drivers themselves sink their heat through the bottom of the chip, so that's why when you see these boards, you know, like I happen to have a Creality board here. When you see these boards that have trinamic drivers with heat sinks, the heat sinks don't help much because the driver sinks its heat through the bottom of the chip. That's why if you notice on our board, there are no heat sinks because it does not need them because this board is actually properly designed. It does lead to a higher cost, but it means that the board actually runs correctly. So if you see here, we literally have a thing on the back of the board by the drivers that says do not add heat sinks. So the PCB is supposed to be the actual heatsink for these type of drivers. And you don't have to take my word for it, and I'd recommend you don't. Go look at the datasheet for Trinamic 2208 and 2209 drivers. They specifically specify 4-layer PCBs with high copper count, meaning 2-ounce copper on every single layer, because that's how they're meant to be kept cool. So we've never had heat sinks on any of our boards because we actually followed the driver manufacturer's recommendations of not cheaping out on the circuit board. So let's see here. Spasmatic, are you running stock cooling ducts on your machine? And if not, what's your preference? So for ABS machines, I typically stick with the stock cooling because they don't need much cooling when you're putting ABS. For my PLA machines, they either have like the red squirrel design I'm kind of warming up to because it's simple. The Hero Me, even though it's very fiddly and can be fragile sometimes, it is a very well designed and efficient cooling duct for an aftermarket one. I have a Pet's Fang style on a couple times, or I have Pet's Fang ducts on a couple of my machines here, and I do like those as well. I do not use this. If I'm changing out to an aftermarket hot end mount and upgrading the cooling, I do not stick with the stock fan. I usually run the 5015 blower fans, which we carry in our shop for 12 and 24 volts. And I believe we just restocked on those. So if you guys are waiting on fans, we just got more fans in a couple days ago, and they should be stocked on the site. If not, post in the chat and I'll bug Danielle because they should have been stocked already. I know they came in. So, but yeah, let's see. Andrew Osner, what do I think of the Ender 3 S1? I saw it. It looks neat. I haven't played with it, so I can't give an opinion on it other than it looks neat. Let's see. Donovan said, if I upgrade to an E3D Revo, is it likely I need to design my own mount and cooling solution to use it with an Ender 5? I believe they have the Revo. There's a heatsink option for the Revo that basically makes it into a groove mount so it fits in the V6 footprint. I was literally just watching the Revo Voron Edition video, and they had all the different heatsinks, and it looks like, now someone correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't looked at the Revo system in detail. It does look like a nice system. I like the integrated heat break and nozzle. That's going to solve a lot of issues with people having filament leaking. But I believe they have it so it can drop in. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they have it so you can drop into existing V6 mounts, which is very smart because having a mounting solution and expecting customers to design their own mounting solution for an entire hot end definitely makes it a higher barrier for a user to get in because not everybody knows how to design stuff. It would take me a long time to design a mount for a printer. So, Jordan Scott, anyone had an Ender 3 Pro showing weird Chinese letters during a print? The print runs normal, but the display is a mess. On a power cycle, it's fine again. So that is electrical interference on the printer. So we had Ender 5 that would do that here in our shop, and it was weird because it was the only one on that circuit that did it, but we ended up having a bad ground on that actual circuit itself, like the actual outlet did not have a solid ground. But if you've ruled out your actual wall outlet being the problem, it could be something as simple as a bad ground on your actual printer itself, which is not uncommon. I would check the continuity between the actual grounding post on the AC receptacle all the way to the chassis of the power supply. And just make sure everything's tightened down in terms of the screws holding the power supply to the frame. But anytime you see those, like the 12864 screens, and they start getting these weird Chinese letters, that indicates that the SPI lines that communicate between the board and the screen are suffering interference, and the screen freaks out and just starts displaying random characters. So definitely going to be something related to power issues, and usually it's related to bad grounding. So let's see. Oh yeah, that's another good superconductor made a good point. So if you're using your printer with a computer or an Octoprint setup like a Raspberry Pi, we also eliminated a lot of weird issues where we'd have printers dropping off of the network, or not the network, but disconnecting from our Raspberry Pis, and occasional display corruption. Until we put the power blockers on there, because the Creality boards and a lot of the Big Tree Tech boards, I haven't tested their new E3 or E3V3 because I don't have one. But a lot of the cheaper boards and the Crealities do this. They don't properly isolate the 5-volt rail on the actual board. So when you put power into your board, it has a step down to supply 5-volt and 3.3 volt on these 32-bit boards. And they don't isolate the 5-volt coming from the USB. So what can happen is the board can draw too much current and get even interference and weird stability issues because it's pulling power from the 5-volt onboard regulator and your USB port. And using something like a power blocker severs that 5-volt connection and leaves the ground and the data lines intact. And we have the power blockers in our shop. And it's just a simple thing that you put on the end of the USB cable before you plug it into a computer, and it kills the connection there. And there's some people that they'll shove like electrical tape in the plug of their USB port. That works, but the problem is the tape ends up gumming up and making your port really gross because of the adhesive. I prefer just use the power blockers. I have one on my Ender 6 because I was having weird issues with it as well. But it's not uncommon. Let's see. Derek Surreal, thanks for the $5 tip. That will go towards buying more maw. I'm restoring a TiVo Tarantula. It's all 12 volt. What can I do to reduce the risk of the wire casing in the main board from burning? It's an MKS S-base. Is that original TiVo Tarantula that didn't even have a layer fan? Because there's a video, I think it's on this channel. I think Banggood sent me one. That was really, it was cheap, but it was just not a good printer. But I mean, for the time, it wasn't bad. Now I wouldn't touch it. If it's an original Tarantula, not the Tarantula Pro, I would probably not even waste your time. If it's 12 volt, I think that would be a Tarantula, like the original one. Honestly, I would part that out. But what can I do to reduce the risk of the wire casing in the main board from burning? Basically taking load off of that terminal. So for the bed, running a bed through the MOSFET and making sure you're not having any tinned wires, either put bare wires or crimp ferrules on there. So let's see. Gfish, I installed spider-type couplers on my Chiron Z-rods. I keep separating during printing. Is this because there's binding somewhere along the Z-travel? Yes. Typically, if you have their spider-type couplers, plumb couplers, I have them on machines here. They're nice to have in the event of a nozzle crash because instead of it driving the nozzle into the bed, they just go pop and they just spin. The problem is if you do have a mechanical issue on the printer, that requires it to kind of really pull that gantry down, meaning it's not rolling smoothly, they will separate because there's forces being applied to that. So check all your V-slot wheels. If you have an eccentric nut that's over tightened, it could be applying too much pressure and causing the rods to separate. I would start there. That's the simplest thing. Could just be a simple adjustment issue. But yes, if you have, spider or plumb type couplers on your Z rods and they're separating during a print, that usually indicates that something's binding up on the Z axis and those couplers are doing what they're supposed to do, which is in the event of strain going that way, they separate to prevent damage. So and that's something that should be checked. Because even if you were to put the old couplers back on there, there's still something wrong mechanically. It's just kind of letting you know that there's a problem because they're separating. Let's see. Vincent says, some people say to measure E-steps while extruding. Some say to remove the nozzle and measure E-steps according to the 100 millimeter advance. Does it matter to get the best result? I've always done it without it feeding into the nozzle. I've done calibrations on direct drives. I usually will just remove the hot end so the filament just goes straight out. Or what you can do too is mark the filament before it goes into the actual extruder. So you can measure a mark, put a mark like 120 millimeters up, and then see how much is left by the time you tell it to move 100. So if you tell it to move 100 and there's only 15 millimeters left between the mark and the top of the extruder, you're over extruding and can get the same kind of information from that. But I always do it without feeding it through the nozzle. Like if it's on a Bowden system, I pull the tube out, I measure it, and I extrude it and then measure it that way. And then once it's done, I put it all back together. So let me see here. JT, what's a rough time for updating the EasyBoard V2 firmware for the PT100 amplifier board? I don't have an ETA because I've got a lot of other stuff on my plate, and the number of PT100 users, it's not even a part we sell, are very low. So I'm just gonna be honest with you, I don't know because I've got literally a list of like 50 other things I have to do right now. But the Slice Engineering, their PT1000 is what I would recommend going with. The PT100, I think E3D might be still selling that, but in all honesty, the PT100 is just such an old product in the 3D printing world. The PT1000s and stuff that doesn't require an amplifier board. So the PT100 is a thermal couple, whereas the PT1000 are like a thermistor, so they don't require an amplifier board. Yeah, I'm looking here. I feel like I read this question already. Maybe it got posted twice. Oh, Nemo Griffith's clarifying because he's asking about the load and unload links. He swaps from direct drive to Bowden on his EasyBoard depending on what he is doing. He doesn't want to flash the board each time you need to swap. What I would do then is go and uncomment the option because the EasyBoard, even the V1, has tons of memory available. Uncomment the option in the configuration ADV file to enable the LCD settings, which will also give you G-code commands. And what I would do is have two separate profiles, which you probably do anyways, if you're switching between direct drive and Bowden, and you can put those G-code commands to set the unload and load lengths in your starting code for the profile. So that way, when you run a file that was sliced for the direct drive, before it does like G28 and all this other stuff, it will then set those lengths. And then the next time you go to print one that's got the Bowden profile, it'll then set the load lengths. So that's what I would do. You can do a lot with starting code and kind of automating your processes in an instance like this where you're switching between a direct drive and a Bowden setup. So, you know, you can also do the same thing too. Like, let's say you have a situation where you have different print services and each print service has a slightly different Z offset. You could also put your Z offset before all the other starting code to set that Z offset. So let's say I've got, you know, I got a glass, you know, profile and I've got a flex plate profile and they have a slightly different Z offset for the ABL sensor. You could put that Z offset setting in your starting code. So it changes it when you run that profile. So it's fun to do stuff like that. Let's see. Do I have a list on GitHub of firmware stuff you want done? It's not mostly firmware stuff I want done. It's lists of requests that people are making to me, and I've just started getting better at being like, no, I don't have time for that, because I used to tell everybody, yeah, I can do that, and I would overcommit, and I just don't have, I only have so many hours in the day. Running a company takes a lot of time. So let's see. Mariah Wheat says, I've got a totally stock Ender 6. This is my first printer. I've been using it for a little over a month. Good. So I'm glad you clarified that, because if you told me you just got it, I would tell you to use it stock for a month at least. So it's good that you have some time under your belt with the printer stock. The first upgrade I recommend, because I hate the touchscreen, is changing the touchscreen out. We do sell a full kit to swap the screen out that uses the stock board. That's what I have on mine. As you start getting more and more advanced, like the stock screen gets the job done, but when you start wanting to play with different settings, like tuning your acceleration and jerk, if you add an auto bed leveling probe, whether it's our Easy ABL or a BL Touch, being able to set that stuff from the LCD screen and do what's called baby stepping, which is a fine adjustment of the nozzle height when you start to print, is something that's way easier with the, you know, the older style LCDs. People, some people really like the touchscreens because they're pretty and they're color, but the reality is the blue backlit ones, and they come in different colors, but the most common is a blue backlight with white text. You know, they look very primitive, but they actually provide more features than the touchscreens. So that's my first upgrade on that printer. And then I have on mine, I have the LCD kit, I have our Easy ABL, and then I have our flex plate system. So I put auto bed leveling on every single printer I use, even if the bed's relatively flat, mainly because I don't ever want to deal with having to level the bed. And once you put an auto bed leveling system on, like our Easy ABL or the BL Touch, you can get rid of the springs holding your bed and solid mount the bed, so you don't ever have to mess with those knobs. And that's more a quality of life improvement, in my opinion. I was talking about this with someone in our Discord server about how, you get a new printer, once you have, once you know what you like on your printers, a lot of people are like, yeah, I struggled with leveling the bed and just put up with it. I could do it. But then I was like, I'm going to buy the AZABL and put on there, and it's like, I can't go back. So it's a very big quality of life improvement. So let's see. Ken Cunningham says, what aftermarket 32-bit board works as a suitable replacement for the 8-bit CR10 and Ender boards? It doesn't sound like they all work. Some guys in my group have a lot of trouble changing over. So it really depends. So like our Easy board that we have, which we do actually have stock on them, we don't have many left. I do have more in production right now. We're still dealing with shortages and delays, but we do have some in stock right now. Our Easy Board V2 will work on the CR10s and the Ender series, so the Ender 3, the Ender 5, the 5 Plus, and all the CR10 models that have those that are not like the V2 doesn't work, the V3 doesn't work because those are completely different boards. But if your board has this, if you open up your board and it has this footprint, meaning you've got your SD, the micro SD, and the mini USB, this is what will fit. We actually have a full list, but because Corelli likes to reuse that CR10 model name, I want to make sure that it doesn't fit all CR10s, because initially the CR10 series was just one printer. It was a 300 by 300 by 400. Then they came out with the mini. They came out with the S4 and the S5, and they also had the CR10S, S4, and the S5, and the CR10S. Those all work with the EasyBoard V2, regardless of what version you have. But there's also the CR10 V2, and there's a CR10 V3, and there's also the CR10S Pro and the CR10S Max. Those will not be a quick swap out because those boards are completely different footprint and connection. So like if you're looking for a drop-in replacement and you have like a CR10 V2 or a V3 or a CR10S Pro or a CR10S Max, or that, I think they got the new one, the Smart, they just keep reusing that model number. Those are all completely different boards. So if you have a question, give the exact model number to our live chat. So during business hours, which is 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and we're on Central Time here, they will tell you if the printer will work. And if you're still not sure, take a picture of your board and send it either on live chat or send a ticket in. So we do pre-sale stuff to make sure you guys get the correct parts for your printer. So if you're not sure, our team is able to sort it out and let you know, hey, this will work or it won't work. So it's better to ask than assume, and then you get the board and, oh, I can't put it in. So, use our support guys. That's what we pay them for. They're here to make sure that you get the right stuff. So if you have any questions, make sure to ask them. They get, what you might think are dumb questions all the time. They're not going to judge you. We'd rather you ask the question before purchasing rather than, making a guess and you get it and you're like, this doesn't work. But we do also after sales support, and all of our guys here are in the US and they're all from the 3D printer community. So, get help from a bunch of nerds. Let's see. Whew, that was a lot of talking. Am I talking fast today? I feel like I am. I used to have a post-it note on my monitor that says, talk slower. Dean Hens says, since I switched to the 427 from the 422, I've not had any layer shifts, and the Y motor seems to also run cooler. Okay, I'm assuming that was when we were talking about the Ender 3 V2 getting layer shifts. Yeah, it's not uncommon for those V2s to get layer shifts. We haven't had issues with layer shifting on ours, but we keep that room pretty cool. So if you got something that's like a higher ambient temperature, I can definitely see how they could easily overheat, because there's just not a lot of copper on those boards. I got to cut costs somewhere. Marcus says he's got a CR10 S5. One of the Z lead screws are getting stuck sometimes. One side only. Is there an easy fix, or should I just replace the rods? So the first thing I would do is, if you've checked all mechanicals, meaning all your wheels are rolling smooth and they're adjusted, you've lubricated the rod, you've loosened up the 2 screws that hold the brass lead screw nuts. So on the CR10 machines, and even the Enders and stuff, there's that brass nut that the lead screw threads into that's on the bracket. Those should actually be backed out a little bit so the nut can kind of float in the bracket. If those are tightened down and your lead screw is not perfectly straight, you can get binding. The easiest way to check if you have a bent Z-rod or a lead screw, I should say, is take it off the printer, put it on a table that you know is flat, and roll it. And if it rolls smooth, and you can hear it, if it rolls smooth, then you know it's straight. Obviously, if it's really bad, you can look at it and see. But the easiest way is put it on a table and roll it. And if you hear it going like whoop, 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 instead of just like a uniform sound, then you know it's bent. So, but bent lead screws, I feel like people have gotten the industry in general, even with the cheaper Chinese sellers. I feel like bent lead screws are few and far between these days. I think the last printer I got a bent lead screw on was my ANET A8 Plus, and coming from ANET, I'm not shocked that I got a bent lead screw. If you do have a bent lead screw, I don't carry lead screws, but I do buy lead screws when I need them from a company out of Texas called Zyltech, Zyltech, and they actually have, I think it's like about $20, depending on the length. You can tell them the exact length you want to cut, and they'll cut it within a millimeter or two. So you can measure your stock rod, see how long that is, and then order a replacement. So, and if I have a printer that's got dual Z and one of them is bent, I'll usually just buy a pair and replace both of them, and then I'll set the other one that's not bent or warped aside just to have as a spare in case it gets bent or something. So, Bardicus, man, a lot of people with the 422s. I knew the 422 issues were not uncommon, but I'm surprised we have as many people in our little chat here that have had issues, because we got Bardicus, same here. I had a 422 board replaced in my Ender 3 V2. They replaced it with a 427 under warranty. No issues with the new board, even printing and closed. That's impressive. Joseph said, I had layer shifts on the 422, but none with the 427. JC's RC is asking, I've had Ender 3 V2 for about 4 months and loving it. Considering a CR10 V3 for larger print volume. I watched your CR10 V2 review. Any current thoughts on the CR10 V3? My Telegram is going nuts. I'm seeing if somebody, my buddy Max is messaging me. He was having an MRI done. They're trying to find issues with his spine, so I only got 10 minutes left. I'll get back to him. Max, if you're watching, I will talk to you when I'm done with the stream. But anyways, back to the CR10 V3. I think the V2 is a good printer if you keep it stock. In terms of like electronics, my biggest gripe with them, and I've said this about Creality, is it frustrates me that they put out a new board revision. This is for the Ender 2 Pro. They put a slight board revision for all these different printers, which as a customer, it makes it really hard to swap out boards. So, you know, like our EasyBoard V2 fits a variety of Creality and Solval printers, but there's also a variety of printers it doesn't fit in terms of a drop and replace it, meaning you can unbolt the old board, drop the new one in, and plug some cables in and set your firmware up and go. The TLDR is the V3, I think, is a good printer if you can get it for a good price. The CR10 V2 and the V3 are the same machine. The difference is the V3 comes with a direct drive upgrade kit pre-installed. Other than that, they're the same machine. So, but, let's see. I'm looking here to see if there's any other quick questions, because we are getting up on time. I like to keep these about an hour because I've got a ton of other stuff to do. I'm glad I dropped the streams down to once a week because it was getting a little ridiculous. Even though I like streaming, I also have a ton of stuff to get done. This YouTube channel is not my like primary thing. This is just something I do for fun and to post videos too. Let's see. All right. Your daily scoop of poop emoji said, I tried to print a suction cup in my Ender 2 Pro. Once it gets to the first layer, it raises up and starts to print in the air. PLA, 200 degrees and 60C hot on the bed. That sounds like, I'm assuming you're probably printing over an SD card. That sounds like what happens when the SD card is bad and the printer gets corrupt data. It does weird stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with like corrupt G-code files or a bad SD card. Like, it'll work, but all of a sudden, like, you'll have, like, your X or Y. It'll just move out of the way and come back and keep printing. That sounds like a defective SD card, or just something as simple as the G-code file didn't upload correctly. And so it's, like, corrupt. I see the other Tim is in here. Oh, he also has that printer hooked up to the Creality Wi-Fi box. It could be an issue with the Wi-Fi box. In that case, I would try just printing over SD. I'm not a big fan of those Creality Wi-Fi boxes. I'm sorry, I'm not going to put something on my private network that has code I'm not able to validate, and Creality, as far as I know, has not released the source code for those. So, based on experience I've had with Chinese camera suppliers, like IP cameras, and them having backdoors and watching someone telnet into the camera and scan my network, I will not put stuff like that on my network. I'm very big into home automation stuff, and I go out of my way to purchase products that are local control only. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those. But I would remove that from the equation and try printing directly off of an SD card or even from your computer. So it could just be that Wi-Fi box. Those Wi-Fi boxes were a complete flop. I think at one point I saw them selling them for like $2 or something like that. Yeah. Chris Polk is saying, I'd like to add a Mic 6 plate and silicon heater to a King Rune. I'm assuming you're a KP3 or KP3S. Tell me why I shouldn't. Well, one, it's a lot of money to waste on a King Rune. That's just my opinion. And how would I source the heater? You'd probably have to get I'd go a DC bed on that. I'm assuming you're talking about a KP3 or KP3S. Usually if people are talking about King Rune printers, you're talking about the smaller ones, which are the two I have. They're good printers for the money, but I would not waste the money on a Mic 6 plate for that printer. You're going to have to spend almost as much on a plate as you did for the whole printer. But in terms of sourcing the heater, eBay, AliExpress, you could always reach out to Kinovo. Kinovo is my go-to for AC bed heaters, but I have had good, I think it was Robot Dig is the site. I've bought DC heaters from Robot Dig before, and they were good quality. I have one on my Wanhao. But, you know, you just need to know the size of the heater, and you're going to just go online and search and try to find reviews on stuff. But we're almost out of time, so let's see if there's any other quick questions here. I see I got a $5 check from Andrew. He's saying, is there aftermarket all-metal hot end other than the $64 version that you might recommend? I don't know what I mean by $64 version, but we do carry a V6 style hot end in our shop, and I think they're under $30. They're not more than $30. I know the prices have been all over the damn place. But if you're just looking for a good quality hot end that's not going to, you know, break the bank, our tough hot end's a really good option. I have them on quite a few machines here. Yeah, they're $25. And there's a ton of mounts because it's a V6 style hot end. So let's see here. K Fritz, after getting a THD board and EZBL, I wish I had done them sooner. Oh, I'll read it. I was the SKR guy until I decided to get bored. I'm seriously considering ordering a set for the 5 Plus. Yeah, I've said this before. I'm not a big fan of Big Tree Tech stuff, not because they release competing products. It's because their products, they have good ideas, but they cut costs so much that they take a product that could have been good if they put better parts on it and done a little more QC and make it be stuff that doesn't last very long. Or just has a bunch of issues. You know, the thing is, I'm very, very anal about what parts we put on our boards because, you know, you've got all these components. You got tons of components on the boards, okay? You got capacitors, you got resistors, you got all the ICs, you got voltage regulators, fuses. If you're cutting costs by using parts that have really poor tolerances, you know, like a 20% tolerance or 10% tolerance, all those tolerances stack up and leads to a product that doesn't last long and or is unstable. You know, whereas if you're using stuff that's, you know, 1 to 5% tolerance, those tolerances are much more on point and they're just better quality. And that's what I talk about when we're, you know, preaching about our boards being good quality and built well, is that we aren't cheaping out on those parts. We're using name brand parts that have good tolerances versus cheaper, you know, off-brand parts that, or generics that have poor tolerances, because, you know, if you start stacking all those tolerances, it could lead to issues. So let's see. But yeah, and I look at it this way too, because I've seen people go through this, and I've had our customers tell us this, where, you know, they'll be on their, they've been through 2 or 3 of Big Tree Tech's boards, and they're like, it would have been cheaper for me to just buy your board. I'm like, I'm well aware of it. I believe the term is buy once, cry once, and I personally do that myself. With tools and stuff I buy, with electronics, I don't always go for the cheapest stuff. I try to find something to the mid to high end because I have been bitten so many times by buying cheap stuff that only lasts me a little bit, and then I'm having to rebuy it, and at a certain point, I would have just been better off buying the better quality part that's going to last longer than all the cheaper ones combined. And that's ignoring lost time. You know, if I burn, 3 hours swapping boards in and out of a printer, I should have just been better off buying one board that would have been $200-300 that is just going to last, so I'm not having to swap it out. So, your guys' time is valuable. I know people have a lot of free time and, there's this hobby, but I really hate having to swap parts out that are only a couple months old because they were just poor quality. So, let's see here. John Vincent said the 5015 24-volt fans are still out of stock. I should have scrolled down. I'm going to ping Danielle right now. I think, yeah, she's still here. Let's see. Hang on. I'm literally going in Teams. I'm just asking her because she said she was going to stock them yesterday. Something might have happened. We only have, what is it, usually like 2 or 3 people. We have 2 full-time people working our shop out here. And she just said she's working on stocking that stuff as we speak. So before the end of the day today, well, we're getting close, but in about an hour, we should have things stocked on the site. So we did get them in. Shit happens. Let's see. All right, are there any other quick questions I can answer? Because then we got to do our ceremonial dingo stick with the doggo, because he's been really good. Let's see. All right. My chat just jumped. All right, we're just going to wrap this up. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. But if you guys do need help and you're a customer of ours, you need help with a product, just reach out to us. Hit the contact us link at the top of our website. If you like using Discord, I highly recommend you guys checking out our Discord server. We've got over 4,000 people in there, and there's usually always somebody in there that's looking to help. And I kind of poke around in there. I usually hang out in the VIP section. If you're a regular in the server, you can level up and get into the VIP section for free. If you have Discord Nitro and you boost our server, you then get a Nitro role, which then gets you in the VIP section. If you're a YouTube Cult of TH3D member, you also then get access to the VIP section. So if you connect your Discord account to your YouTube account that you use to sponsor the channel, you then will get that role added. So, anyways, let's give Remo his dingo stick, because he was a good doggo. Yeah, you're a good boy. Look at him. He's being so patient today. Which is ironic, because he was a huge pain in the ass earlier. Come here. Can we sit? Speak. Shake. Hang on. Shake. Okay, close enough. Good boy. We got to work on getting that shake honed in so he puts it in my hand, but he's only a year old, so he's doing pretty good. Look at, he's like, I'm gonna take my treat and go disappear to the back of the room. Danielle said that the 5015 24-volt fans were already stocked. Maybe it's cached. I have had issues where our web host caching system will not. It doesn't detect that we stocked things. Oh yeah, so it's a caching issue. So I'll show you guys here. This is interesting. So I should make this I should tell them to do this after they stock things, because this is not the first time this has happened. So here, if I share main monitor here, so this is a private window, and this is me logged in as an admin. You can see they're in stock, but you can see they're out of stock. So if I hit clear cache, this should clear the cache for this. And if I do a refresh, so if I hold down control and hit refresh, there we go. Now they should be showing in stock. So yeah, it was just a caching issue. So I was gonna say, I know we got them in because I saw that I put the boxes in the shop myself. There's a lot of boxes. We got a ton of fans in. So Anyways, I appreciate everybody that stopped by. Make sure you guys enter the giveaway. I think the form I have set to be open until at least 6 or 7. And I hope you guys learned something. If you, like I said, check out our Discord server by going to discord.th3dstudio.com. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys on the next stream. We do these every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central Time. And if you want to get notified before we go live or if we post new videos, there's a link in the video description where you can join our YouTube notification list, and that sends you an email anytime we post a new video or 30 minutes before we're about to go live. So that's the only thing that gets sent out. There's no marketing emails. It's just a simple way to actually get a notification that we're posting something or we're going live, because YouTube notifications suck. So anyways, I will see you guys on the next one, and as always, happy printing.